Welcome to Top 10 Archive, sponsored by the Umbrella Corporation, the world's leading pharmaceutical conglomerate. In 1996, a bombshell was dropped on the PlayStation 1 in the form of Capcom's Resident Evil. Thanks to the slow-paced action horror title, the video game horror genre would never be the same. In this installment, we invite you to shamble through Raccoon City with us as we investigate 10 facts about the Resident Evil video game series. Number 10. Resident Evil 1.5. As with many projects, the Resident Evil series had gone through many transformations throughout development. One of the more notable instances came during the development of Resident Evil 2. Due to issues with the game's tension and pacing being drastically different from the first installment, Resident Evil 1.5 was scrapped entirely. Elsa Walker, a random Raccoon City college student, was replaced by Claire Redfield, sister of Resident Evil protagonist Chris. The male lead, rookie cop Leon S. Kennedy, remained the same, save for an overhaul of the character model. Number 9. The many versions of Resident Evil 3.5. Much like Resident Evil 2, the development process for Resident Evil 4 had been working on an entirely different project than what was released to the public. Resident Evil 4, or what's been popularly titled Resident Evil 3.5, had gone through 4 different builds before the final product was settled on. The first build was more stylized, from Resident Evil's darker tones. This project eventually became Capcom's slasher Devil May Cry. The second and third builds followed Leon S. Kennedy seeking to eradicate another strain of Umbrella's virus, with the third build featuring supernatural elements in the forms of hallucinations. The development team went back to zombies in the fourth build, but the project was decidedly too formulaic and was eventually scrapped. Number 8. Sengoku Biohazard becomes Onimusha. Amongst the many ideas Capcom had for a new Resident Evil during the Nemesis crisis was Sengoku Biohazard. Sengoku would be a complete departure from the events of Raccoon City, taking place in a Japanese-styled house filled with booby traps and puzzles. Instead of firearms, the protagonist used a katana and ninjutsu. Not wanting to take a complete leap away from what the Resident Evil series became known for, Capcom wanted the idea scrapped. Instead, the development team pulled another miracle and turned the idea into another successful series, Onimusha. Like Devil May Cry, another Resident Evil byproduct, Onimusha went on to be a critically successful series with fans pining for a new entry in the series quite often. Number 7. Resident Evil pulls inspiration from Capcom's Sweet Home. In 1989, Capcom brought a gory 8-bit horror fest to the Nintendo Entertainment System. Sweet Home combined RPG gameplay with turn-based combat in a mansion filled with zombies and other deadly hazards. 7 years later, Capcom went back to the root of survival horror to pull plenty of inspiration to create Resident Evil. Though the gameplay varies quite a bit, the games share quite an abundance of similarities, right on down to door animations. Sweet Home features a similar inventory management system as Resident Evil, and in both games, gamers are forced to figure out puzzles in order to progress. Some say Resident Evil is the spiritual successor to Capcom's own Sweet Home. Number 6. Resident Evil houses an extensive extended universe. Thanks to the series' popularity, Resident Evil is more than just a video game and movie franchise. Sure, the video game series spawned a collection of action figures and statues, but it's the line of comic books and animated feature-length films that expand upon the Resident Evil universe. A series of comic book magazines chronicling the heroes of Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2, novel adaptations of Resident Evil 0 through Code Veronica, and 2 animated films, Degeneration and Damnation, have all melded together to create an expansive universe within the game series alone. Number 5. George A. Romero penned faithful Resident Evil movie script. Before Paul W. Anderson turned the Resident Evil series into a mess of action-packed, mindless movies, the father of modern zombie cinema, George A. Romero, had written his own treatment. In Romero's version, compared to Anderson's, there were fewer separations from the source material, and the tone remained rather dark. The lead characters were still intact, though Chris was Jill's boyfriend, and the setting remained inside the massive, spooky mansion. Characters were added to increase on-screen deaths, but the premise remained that members of STARS were trapped in a mansion filled with all sorts of creatures. Number 4. Resident Evil's characters were originally a little comical. In the finished product, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine are accompanied by Barry Burton and Albert Wesker. The original design for the game suggests something completely different was in mind. Originally partnering up with Chris and Jill in Spencer Mansion were Gelzer and Dewey. Goofy names aside, the characters were a complete disconnect from the game's grim setting. Gelzer was an oversized brute with a cybernetic eye, and Dewey was meant to be the game's comic relief character inspired by Eddie Murphy. Both characters were removed during development, with Gelzer being replaced by the gun-toting Barry Burton. Number 3. Resident Evil was originally a first-person shooter. Thanks to Survivor, Dead Aim, The Umbrella Chronicles, and The Darkside Chronicles, whether or not Resident Evil would work as a first-person shooter is not a question that needs asking. In fact, even in its earlier stages, Capcom had the inkling that the series would fit well into that genre. The first installment was initially conceptualized as a far cry from the game it is today. Series creator Shinji Mikami wanted Resident Evil to be a first-person shooter, but eventually realized that, at the time, the genre wouldn't be able to convey horror in the same way as a third-person genre. Evidently, Capcom was correct, as all 5 of the franchise's first-person shooters were lacking the scares. Number 2. Nemesis was originally a spin-off. If not for a contract Capcom had with Sony that required 3 main installments on their consoles, the fan-favorite third entry in the series, Nemesis, would have received a completely different treatment as a Dreamcast title. By the time Resident Evil 2 reached its considerably high level of fame, Capcom was ready to move on to the next project. The problem was they didn't know where to focus their attention. At one time, 3 different Resident Evil projects were underway. Timelines didn't allow the game, which was to feature Umbrella operative Hunk, to be ready for a PS1 release, and with the PS2 launch so close, the project was shelved. Not wanting to make fans wait for a PS2 title, Capcom went back to the drawing board, bringing back protagonist Jill Valentine and the Raccoon City setting for the series' third canonical entry. Shortly after Nemesis, Capcom released Code Veronica on the Dreamcast, a game that felt like a spin-off as its tone and feel was a complete departure from the rest of the series. Number 1. There was a Resident Evil-themed restaurant. Resident Evil may have become extremely popular in Western gaming culture, but there's no forgetting that it was created in Japan. To commemorate the popularity of the series back in 2012, Capcom opened the Biohazard Cafe and Grill. Despite what crowds the cafe and grill would have the potential to bring, it was only scheduled to be open for a year. The interior of the restaurant featured nuggets of Resident Evil history, including everything from the classic typewriter to a full-scale replica of the monstrous Tyrant. Touches like stars, emblems, weaponry from the games, and waitresses dressed like members of the Special Task Force all added to the clever ambiance. Overall, the restaurant pulled in generally negative reviews with plenty of complaints geared towards food quality and overuse of the server's sexuality to pull from the stale, lifeless exhibits.